to stop Iran from enriching its nuclear?
I don't know. I did think so, and I'm getting more and more less confident about it. They seem to be delaying, and I think that's a shame. But I'm less confident now than I would have been a couple of months ago. Something happened to them, but I am much less confident of a deal being made.
That's not good. That's not good at all. So what you've got is Donald Trump concerned about Iran. This, by the way, comes at the same time as we've got some other news out today. First of all, oil's up like 4.6%, which is extremely rare for oil to be up like this. You can see that on the screen here. Yeah, oil now up 4.7 on the Western blend and 4.19 on the international blend. This is pretty rare. You know, we were under 60 there under recessionary concerns for a while. And now you could see this sort of like this downtrend is starting to spike up. Now, oil's obviously very volatile, but look at this recent spike up that we've had here since the beginning of May. Some of this could be attributed to potentially lower recessionary odds because of good data in the labor market and inflation. Others could, quite frankly, be because of this. Iran threatening to strike U.S. bases if conflicts erupt over a nuclear program. Iran defense minister said this country would likely target U.S. bases in the region if a conflict breaks out with the United States. As President Trump says he was losing confidence that a nuclear deal would be agreed to. Washington and Tehran have held 5 rounds of talks since April, and Trump has threatened to attack Iran if no deal can be agreed to. Next talks are either on Thursday, per Trump, or on Sunday, per Tehran. We just heard him say that he's less confident that a deal is going to get done, which isn't great. Here's that New York Post article and piece that they had. He says that they seem to be delaying, that they've changed. Donald Trump then goes on to say, which we didn't see in the video clip, that it would be nicer to do it without warfare, without people dying. It would be much nicer to do it. But I don't think it's the same level of, I don't think I see the same level of enthusiasm for them to make a deal. I think they would make a mistake, but we'll see. I guess time will tell. Now, mind you, Israel has been stepping up their threats against Iran and threatening to attack Iran directly themselves, with or without the United States, which isn't great because you'd want to do this in coordination with the United States and ideally let cooler heads prevail to avoid a complete breakout of everything. Disney and Universal sue Midjourney for copyright infringement. Sorry, that headline just came through. That's wild. Midjourney is getting sued. Oh well. Anyway, the U.S. Navy has also issued a rare warning. This is somewhat interesting. So the U.S. Navy issued a rare warning to mariners that the high tensions in the Middle East could impact shipping, including through the Strait of Hormuz. UKMTO has been made aware of increased tensions within the region, which could lead to an escalation of military activity having a direct impact on mariners. Vessels are advised to transit through the Arabian Gulf, the Gulf of Oman, and the Strait of Hormuz with caution. So, interesting advisory. It looks like this was actually tweeted out. But I can't seem to get that link to show up anymore because when I go to the link, it says this page doesn't exist anymore. So I just have a sort of an older image here of it. And then we've also heard 3 were killed in a tanker blast south of Iran, which some people, suggest that the CIA is involved in these sort of blasts and accidents that happen. And then at the same time, you have Iran say that they're not interested in a nuclear weapon. Of course, they've been saying that for decades, so there's doubt amongst, what Iran is actually up to or interested in doing. Here's an interesting tweet from this person, and I haven't fact-checked the location of all these bases, but I presume it's relatively accurate, which sometimes can be a dangerous thing to do on X, but for what it's worth, this just shows a map of U.S. bases in Iraq, Syria, Turkey, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Uzbekistan, whatever, the UAE, Oman, Saudi Arabia, and so on. So that'll be something to consider, given that Iran is threatening to attack U.S. bases, and that now there's talk that the embassy in Iraq is reportedly preparing to evacuate due to these heightened security risks. And a poster that I generally respect on X says that, where was it? I've actually been tweeting a few times here. Says that something major is up right now in the Middle East. Israel might be preparing to strike Iran. U.S. State Department is preparing to order the departure of all non-essential personnel from the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad, as well as non-essential personnel and family members located in Bahrain and Kuwait. State Department officials tell me, based on our latest security analysis, we decided to reduce the footprint of our mission in Iraq. And this is based on the global affairs correspondent for Axios, also a CNN analyst. According to an official with the State Department, the evacuation of non-essential personnel from the U.S. Embassy compound in Baghdad will be carried out via commercial flights. This is not a picture of a commercial flight. Through the Pentagon, though the Pentagon is standing by and preparing to assist and aid in the evacuation if needed. I like how you talk about using commercial flights, but then you show an image of like a C-130. Wow, by the way, very interesting. Jeffrey Gunlock, who we were alluding to earlier as like, he'd be great for sponsoring House Hack, right? Like, go invest in House Hack, get your 5% yield, get all the upside in the stock, get downside protection in a Reg A offering, read the disclosures, right? Like that joke we were making earlier about Gunlock doing that. By the way, learn about all that at househack.com. The headline they're going with now on him being bearish, which kind of like goes on top of all this Iranian stuff that's going on. The awareness now is that the Treasury bond market is not a legitimate flight to safety, and a reckoning is coming in the economy as well as in bonds. Now, that's very interesting because, he compares today's market, as they say here, to the environment in 1999, just before the dot-com bubble burst, as well as 2006 and 2007 before the global financial crisis. So he's sort of just like a pretty big bear on the economy. And what ends up happening to the economy at the same time as you now get this geopolitical strife, kind of interesting. So now he's always usually a big bond guy, which kind of also makes it interesting. Like, does that mean in the next recession, bonds aren't that flight to safety? Or if the world goes into a global recession, people still go to bonds? Who knows? That's why I like House Hack. U.S. Secretary Pete Hegseth has authorized the voluntary departure of military dependents, so like children, wives, or whatever, housed at bases and other locations across the Middle East. I suppose that's why they're like children here. That lady is either holding a blanket or a baby and a blanket. Here's a child on a laptop. High percentage of women in the picture here. Okay. Now would be a really great time for a press briefing from the Pentagon. Agreed. That's a pinned post. So, yes, something is up. Although exactly what's going on, I suppose, remains to be seen. Because, again, on the Al Jazeera post, all we have so far is this comment that I don't know. Less confident. Somebody writes, must be an old map. There's no way the USA still has those bases in Afghanistan. Yeah, you're probably right about that. We basically abandoned all. That's a good call, actually. Yeah, okay. Now, the Associated Press. U.S. military authorizes the voluntary departure of troops and dependents across the Middle East as tensions with Iran have risen. 2 U.S. officials now say. Okay, so now we're starting to get more mainstream reporting, which is substantially later than what we've already been looking at. But White House officials say Trump is aware of the move of U.S. personnel in the Middle East. That's a Reuters Newswire post. We also have... No, that's mostly it right now. So, the AP piece says the American military has authorized the voluntary departure of troops dependents. Officials said the order came from Hegsth. This is a breaking news update. Officials spoke on a condition of anonymity to discuss a decision that had not yet been made public. Tensions have been rising in recent days as talks between the U.S. and Iran over its advancing nuclear program appear to have hit an impasse. Meanwhile, the Board of Governors at the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Association, was set to potentially vote on measures to censure Iran, so like fine or sanction basically. That could set in an effort to snap back UN sanctions on Iran via a measure in the 2015 nuclear deal with powers that is still active until October. Amid reports of preparations for embassy departures, Iran's mission to the UN posted on social media that threats of overwhelming force won't change the facts. Oh, so you are getting escalating conversations here from Iran. Iranian Defense Minister separately told journalists Wednesday that he hoped talks with the U.S. would yield results, though Tehran stood ready to respond. If conflict is imposed on us, I love these translations. Like, who says that? If conflict is imposed on us. Obviously, these are translations, right? But I think the translations are always kind of funny. It's kind of like when you translate German directly, it's like totally backwards. Anyway, if conflict is imposed on us, the opponent's casualties will certainly be more than ours. And in that case, America must leave the region because all its bases are within our reach. We have access to them, and we will target all of them in the host countries without hesitation. That's a pretty big threat from Iran right there. That's a pretty big boy word right there. These are some big boy threats. I mean, these are starting to sound very similar to Elon saying Trump is on the Epstein list, okay? These are big boy threats. Earlier Wednesday, a statement from the United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations Center, a Mideast-based effort overseen by the British Navy, issued a warning to ships in the region that it had been made aware of increased tensions. That's the post that I was reading off that I couldn't find the tweet of anymore. It did not name Iran, though those waterways have seen Iranian ship seizures and attacks in the past. Wow. Yeah, this appears to be something appears to be rapidly expanding in the Middle East. And this then sort of like, I hate to do this, but it sort of like re-invites the talk about World War III, because that's always what happens here. Because the reality is, if these talks with Iran fall apart because everybody's being a stubborn knucklehead, then unfortunately oil skyrockets, which compresses consumers' purchasing power, which is recessionary. You have Israel and the United States potentially striking Iran. Iran retaliates. How much I mean, we've gone through this drill before. How much? Then Iran does their obligatory retaliation. We shoot down all of their little wee rockets, and then people are like, okay, we'll just go quiet again. But then the question is like, how deep would the United States and Israel strike? I mean, we saw what Israel did to Gaza, which was supposed to be sort of like a limited incursion to root out the Hamas terrorists, which ended up in turning into 55,000 Gazans dead. I guarantee you not all of them are Hamas terrorists. And a whole massive global conflict where people are frustrated about the amount of civilian death in the Gaza Strip and the lack of humanitarian aid. But then Israel's also like, dude, we got raided absolutely ridiculously on June 7th, 2023. I can't believe we're coming up on 2 years of this going on now. That's crazy. 2 years. And is that right? Or was it? It has to have been. Yeah. Hamas invasion into Israel. Did I get the date right? October 7th, 2023. That's what I said, right? That's crazy. We are coming up on 2 years. So, we don't want to start a 2-year war with Iran, and this thing's not even over yet. And we got enough conflicts. We've got Putin, who's digging in. Trump can't get his 24-hour deal done to end the war in Ukraine, and if anything, is now realizing that Putin's a little bit more of a stubborn knucklehead than he previously anticipated. On top of that, China and the Chinese trade deal is going nowhere. The Japanese refused to negotiate with us. And now we potentially have to worry about this bullcrap in Iran. This sucks. Somebody in the chat says, what's the money strategy if we break out into World War III? Typically, and this is not, this is not, what's it called, financial advice, obviously. But typically, geopolitical events are buy the dip events. Typically. Like, when you look at history, they've always historically been buy the dips. In the near term, is that possible? Or is it possible for this to lead into a recession? That's the bigger question. Is this just going to be another factor that leads us into this long-awaited recession? So if you believe recession, cash is nice. If you believe this is just like some BS in the Middle East, drama or whatever, it's realistically and historically always a buy the dip event. So that's kind of, but one can turn into the other, right? Buy the dip event could absolutely happen in isolation, and then all of a sudden we get bad jobs reports. So if you're buying the dip, still pay attention to the labor market is my POV on this. Iran's mission to the UN, U.S. CENTCOM legacy of fueling regional instability through arming aggressors and enabling Israeli crimes. Strips it of any credibility to speak on peace and non-proliferation. Basically, because the United States continues to aggravate situations in the Middle East with their influence, this is Iran's wording, they don't have a leg to stand on when it comes to talking about not expanding the usage of nuclear weapons. Iran's mission to the United Nations says diplomacy, not militarism, is the only path forward. Please don't strike us is basically what they're saying. 24 U.S. lawmaker... Okay, well, that's unrelated. And the White House is aware of what's going on. All right. Then... That's it. U.S. partially evacuate the U.S. embassy. Yeah, you're starting to see more and more stories on this. Makes sense. Very logical that we're seeing more of these stories start pouring out. But that gives you a little bit of a breakdown on what's going on, as well as tons of messages today over U.S. Air Force high-frequency global communication system. They're broadcasting really weird stuff on the HF channels right now. Is it happening? Very interesting. In the meantime, U.S. military official says Marines deployed in Los Angeles will not carry live ammunition in their rifles. Wonder what good that does. And in other news, Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass says, I want to speak to Trump. He don't want to talk to you. All right, that gives you an update on what's going on in Iran.
Why not advertise these things that you told us here? I feel like nobody else knows about this.
We'll try a little advertising and see how it goes.
Congratulations, man. You have done so much. People love you. People look up to you.
Kevin Paffrath there, financial analyst and YouTuber. Meet Kevin. Always great to get your take.